My name is Eden. I'm 32 years old, and I was supposed to have my fairy tale wedding today. Thomas and I had been together for 3 years, engaged for one. I thought I knew him. I thought I could trust him. My mother Amanda has always had boundary issues, always tried to compete with me. But what I discovered last night went beyond anything I could have imagined. The night before my wedding, I walked into our apartment to find my own mother in bed with my fiancé. Now I'm standing at the church entrance in my wedding dress. What happens next will change everything. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from. Hit subscribe and like this video to find out what I said that silenced the entire church. I grew up as the daughter of Amanda Jenkins, a woman who turned heads everywhere she went. With her flowing blonde hair, perfect figure, and magnetic personality, my mother was the kind of woman other women envied and men desired. She had me young at just 20, and my father left when I was barely 3 years old. Growing up, it was always just the two of us, and I adored her despite her flaws. But as I entered my teenage years, I began to notice something unsettling about my mother. She didn't seem to want to be just my mom. She wanted to be the center of attention, even when the attention should have been on me. The first time I noticed this pattern, I was 14. I had invited my first real crush, Jake, over to study. My mother sauntered into the living room wearing a tiny tank top and shorts, her hair freshly styled. She insisted on bringing us snacks and lingered laughing too loudly at Jake's nervous jokes and touching his shoulder unnecessarily. I watched his eyes follow her around the room, completely forgetting I was there. When he left, he asked about my mom, not me. That was the first cut, but far from the last. By 16, I had learned to be cautious, but my mother always found ways to insert herself. At my high school talent show, where I performed a song I'd spent months practicing, she showed up in a dress so revealing that the principal nearly asked her to leave. All anyone talked about the next day was how hot my mom was, not my performance that won second place. During my senior prom, she volunteered as a chaperone and spent the night flirting with my date and his friends. I came home early alone and in tears. When she returned hours later, she couldn't understand why I was upset. "We were just having fun, Eden," she said, as if my feelings were an overreaction. College provided escape, and I purposely chose a school 3 states away. During those years, I began to establish boundaries with my mother and learned what healthy relationships looked like through therapy and supportive friends. I dated cautiously, always wary of bringing boyfriends home during breaks. Those I did introduce to my mother rarely lasted long. She would find subtle ways to undermine me, comparing our bodies, mentioning embarrassing childhood stories, or treating them with a flirtatious familiarity that made everyone uncomfortable. After graduation, I moved to Chicago and built a life for myself as an interior designer. I was 29 when I met Thomas at a charity fundraiser for children's art programs. He was 34, established in his career as an architect, and unlike anyone I'd dated before. Tall, with kind blue eyes and a quiet confidence, Thomas listened when I spoke, remembered small details about my preferences, and made me feel valued in a way I hadn't experienced before. Our connection was immediate and deep. On our third date, we stayed up until dawn just talking, covering everything from childhood dreams to our favorite breakfast cereals. By our second month together, we were practically inseparable. Thomas made me feel safe, and for the first time, I began to believe I could have a healthy, lasting relationship. I held off introducing Thomas to my mother for 6 months, the longest I'd ever waited with anyone. When they finally met over dinner at an upscale restaurant in the city, I watched them like a hawk. My mother was on her best behavior at first, complimenting my choice without any backhanded comparisons. But as the wine flowed, I noticed her leaning in too close when she spoke to him, letting her hand linger on his arm, laughing with her head thrown back to expose her neck. Thomas seemed oblivious, treating her with polite respect while keeping his focus on me. At the time, I felt relieved and even a bit smug. Finally, I had found a man who wasn't susceptible to my mother's charms. Later that night, Thomas told me he thought my mother was nice but a bit much. I took it as confirmation that he saw through her performance. Our relationship progressed naturally. At 1 year, we moved in together, combining our styles in a cozy apartment with a view of the city. At 2 years, we had weathered our first real arguments, a health scare, when Thomas's father had a minor stroke, and the ups and downs of merging our lives. Through it all, Thomas remained my rock steady and loving. The proposal came during a weekend hike at Starved Rock State Park, a place we both loved. At the edge of a stunning canyon overlook, Thomas dropped to one knee and pulled out a vintage sapphire ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "Eden," he said, his voice catching, "you've brought light and beauty into my world. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" My yes echoed across the canyon. Wedding planning brought my mother back into my life more prominently than she had been in years. She insisted on being involved in every decision, from the venue to the flowers to the menu. At first, I welcomed her enthusiasm, thinking it was her way of supporting me. But soon the old patterns emerged. She criticized my choice of wedding dress, saying it didn't showcase my assets properly. She suggested she wear white too, as the mother of the bride, an idea I quickly shut down. She flirted with the male wedding vendors and tried to change my decisions when I wasn't around. Several times I had to call vendors to correct changes my mother had tried to make. Through all of this, Thomas remained supportive, offering to limit her involvement when he saw how stressed I became after her visits or calls. But something subtle began to shift in the months leading up to the wedding. Thomas started working late more often. He became protective of his phone, taking calls in another room. He seemed distracted during our conversations, often asking me to repeat myself. I chalked it up to work stress and wedding planning. His architecture firm was competing for a major project, and we were both overwhelmed with finalizing details for our big day. When I asked if everything was okay, he would pull me into a hug and assure me he was just tired. Like a fool, I believed him. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs I chose to ignore. The way my mother would ask about Thomas with a hint of something possessive in her voice. The time I caught them in what seemed like an intimate conversation that abruptly stopped when I entered the room. Thomas's increasingly frequent excuses to pick up or drop off wedding items at my mother's house alone. The text messages I glimpsed from Amanda on his phone that he quickly explained away as questions about wedding surprises for me. I wanted so badly to believe that this time would be different, that I had finally found someone who saw me, chose me, loved me above all others, someone even my mother couldn't take away. I was wrong. The rehearsal dinner was held at Bellini's, an Italian restaurant with a private banquet room that Thomas and I had fallen in love with during our first year of dating. The tables were adorned with soft candlelight and early spring flowers, creating the warm, intimate atmosphere I had envisioned. Everyone important in our lives was gathered together. Thomas's parents, Margaret and Robert, who had welcomed me like a daughter from our first meeting. His younger brother Kyle, who would serve as best man. My bridesmaids, led by my best friend Jasmine, and various extended family members and close friends. My mother arrived fashionably late, making an entrance in a red dress that hugged every curve and dipped low in both the front and back. Several conversations stopped as she swept in air-kissing cheeks and introducing herself to Thomas's relatives with theatrical enthusiasm. I felt the familiar twist in my stomach but pushed it down. This was my night, and I wouldn't let her behavior affect me. The real shock came 20 minutes later when my father William walked in with his new wife Bethany. I had invited him, of course, but hadn't been certain he would attend the rehearsal dinner. We had a cordial but distant relationship since my parents' divorce, reconnecting more meaningfully only in recent years. Seeing him brought a rush of unexpected emotion, a mixture of happiness and the lingering sadness of a child who had missed her father. My mother's reaction was immediate and alarming. Her body stiffened, her smile became brittle, and she headed straight for the bar. Within an hour, she was on her third martini and had positioned herself at the center of a group of Thomas's college friends, laughing too loudly and touching the arm of anyone who spoke to her. During the main course, I noticed something that sent a chill through me. My mother kept glancing at Thomas, and occasionally he would meet her gaze before quickly looking away. There was a familiarity in that exchange that disturbed me, but I dismissed it as my old insecurities surfacing at a stressful time. Jasmine, always perceptive, leaned over during dessert. "Is everything okay with Thomas? He seems tense," she whispered. I looked across at my fiancé, who was indeed more subdued than usual, nursing a whiskey, and responding with only brief smiles to conversation around him. "Just pre-wedding jitters, I think," I replied, but a seed of doubt had been planted. As the night progressed, my mother became increasingly inappropriate, regaling Thomas's conservative family with risque stories and making thinly veiled comments about her own romantic history. When she began describing her lingerie shopping experience for a special someone, I finally intervened, suggesting it was time to wrap up as we had an early day tomorrow. Following tradition, Thomas and I would spend the night apart. I would stay at the hotel with my bridesmaids while he returned to our apartment. We said our goodbyes in the restaurant parking lot, surrounded by family and friends. His kiss felt distant, mechanical. When I searched his eyes, asking silently if everything was truly okay, he squeezed my hand and whispered, "I love you. Get some rest." Back at the hotel, my bridesmaids attempted to create a festive atmosphere with champagne and wedding-themed games, but my heart wasn't in it. Around midnight, after the others had fallen asleep in our shared suite, I realized with a start that I had left my handwritten vows in the desk drawer at home. The thought of walking down the aisle without them was unbearable. I debated waking Jasmine, but decided against it. It would be a quick trip, 20 minutes to our apartment, grab the vows, and back to the hotel before anyone noticed. I slipped out quietly, the spring night air cool against my skin as I drove through the nearly empty streets. Our apartment building was quiet when I arrived just past midnight. I took the elevator up to the 4th floor, fishing my keys from my purse. As I approached our door, I heard something that made me pause. Music playing softly and what sounded like laughter. My first thought was that Thomas had invited Kyle over for some last-minute male bonding. I inserted my key quietly, not wanting to interrupt their time together. But as the door swung open, other sounds became clear. Rhythmic movements, hushed gasps, a woman's voice murmuring encouragement. My body moved on autopilot, drawn toward our bedroom by a terrible certainty that was already forming in my mind. The door was partially open, spilling a slice of warm light into the hallway. I pushed it wider, and the scene before me shattered my world into 1,000 jagged pieces. My mother was in our bed, the bed Thomas and I had shared for 2 years. Her blonde hair spilled across my pillows, her body entwined with my fiancé's. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't notice me at first. I stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to speak, watching the ultimate betrayal play out before my eyes. It was my mother who saw me first. Her eyes widened, but instead of shame, I saw something else flicker across her face, something that looked horribly like triumph. "Eden," she gasped, not bothering to cover herself. Thomas whirled around, his face draining of color. "Eden, oh God, I didn't mean." The shock gave way to physical illness. I barely made it to the bathroom before emptying the contents of my stomach. Through the roaring in my ears, I could hear scrambling excuses forming my name being called. But I couldn't face them. Not now. Possibly not ever. I fled the apartment, their voices following me down the hallway. In the elevator, an elderly neighbor asked if I was all right, concern etched on her kind face. I must have looked like a madwoman, pale, shaking tears streaming down my face. "My wedding's off," I told her with a strangled laugh that bordered on hysteria. Her confused expression was the last thing I registered before the doors opened and I ran to my car. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind replaying the scene in endless, torturous loops. The familiar curves of my mother's body. Thomas's hands on her skin. The look in my mother's eyes when she saw me. Not surprise, not shame, but a perverse satisfaction at having once again proven she was more desirable, more worthy of attention than her daughter. Around 3 a.m, I found myself parked at the lakefront, watching the moonlight ripple across the dark water. In less than 12 hours, I was supposed to be walking down the aisle to pledge my life to a man who had just destroyed me. The thought was so absurd that it cut through my shock, forcing me to confront the decision that now lay before me. The hotel room felt like a tomb as I sat on the edge of the bed staring at my wedding dress hanging on the closet door. Its delicate lace and pearl beading had once represented all my hopes for the future. Now it seemed to mock me with its pristine whiteness, its promise of a beginning that would never come. My phone had been ringing intermittently since I returned to the hotel around 4 in the morning. Thomas, my mother, Jasmine. I had silenced it, unable to speak to anyone as I tried to process the magnitude of the betrayal. The two people I should have been able to trust most in the world had committed the ultimate act of treachery, and on the night before, what should have been the happiest day of my life. As I sat in the growing light of dawn, memories flooded back, taking on new and painful significance. The time Thomas had mentioned my mother reminded him of a younger Jennifer Aniston, a comparison that had seemed innocent then, but now felt calculated to flatter. The wedding errands that had taken him to her house repeatedly in recent weeks. The hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room. And my mother, her excessive interest in our relationship. Her probing questions about our intimacy, thinly disguised as maternal concern, her increasingly revealing outfits when Thomas was around. How long had this been going on? Was it a one-time mistake fueled by pre-wedding anxiety and alcohol, or something more deliberate, more sustained? The thought made me physically ill again. My phone buzzed with another text. Jasmine. Eden, where are you? We're all worried. The hair and makeup team will be here in an hour. The wedding. My God, the wedding. 200 guests would be arriving at the church by 1 o'clock, expecting to witness a joyful union. Our families had flown in from across the country. Tens of thousands of dollars had been spent on flowers, food, music, photography. The practical part of my brain cataloged all the logistical nightmares of canceling at this late hour, while another part screamed that none of that mattered compared to the devastation of my trust. I stood up and paced the room, possibilities racing through my mind. I could call everything off right now, send everyone home, hide away, and lick my wounds in private. I could confront Thomas and my mother, publicly create a scene that would satisfy my need for revenge, but leave me looking as broken as I felt. I could simply disappear, leaving everyone to wonder what had happened to the bride. None of these options felt right. None of them honored the person I had worked so hard to become. Someone strong, someone with dignity, someone who wouldn't let others define her worth. As the sun rose fully over the Chicago skyline, I remembered something my grandmother had told me years ago before she passed. We had been discussing my mother's behavior, and I had been in tears over another incident where she had flirted with a boy I liked. Eden, my grandmother had said, taking my hands in her weathered ones. Some people will always try to dim your light because they can't stand to see you shine. Don't give them the power to turn off your switch. Instead, shine so brightly that their shadows are exposed for what they are. In that moment, I knew what I needed to do. It wouldn't be easy. It would require every ounce of courage I possessed. But it would be honest, and it would be on my terms. I picked up my phone and called Jasmine. Her relief was palpable when I finally answered. Eden, where have you been? We've been so worried. Are you okay? No, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm not okay, but I need you to come to my room alone. Right now. There's something I have to tell you. 20 minutes later, Jasmine sat beside me on the bed, her hand covering her mouth in shock as I recounted what I had discovered. Those absolute monsters, she whispered when I finished. Eden, you can't go through with this wedding. We'll call everyone right now. I'll help you pack. We can be on a plane to anywhere by tonight. I shook my head. No, I'm not running away. I'm not hiding. I have a different plan and I need your help. I outlined what I intended to do. Jasmine's eyes widened, then narrowed with fierce approval. It's perfect, she said. Absolutely perfect. And I'll be right there with you every step of the way. We spent the next hour making discreet arrangements, Jasmine running interference with the other bridesmaids and the wedding coordinator. When the hair and makeup team arrived, I allowed them to transform me as planned, sitting silently as they curled my hair and applied foundation over my tear-streaked face. Pre-wedding jitters, the makeup artist asked sympathetically as she concealed the dark circles under my eyes. Something like that, I replied, meeting my own gaze in the mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed different somehow. Older, harder, but also more certain. This was not how I had imagined starting my married life. But perhaps it was exactly how I needed to reclaim my power. My phone continued to buzz throughout the morning. Thomas's messages grew increasingly desperate. Please talk to me. It was a terrible mistake. I love you, not her. My mother's alternated between defensive and manipulative. It just happened, Eden. You're overreacting as usual. Don't throw away your future over one little indiscretion. I read them all but responded to none. They would have their answers soon enough. As the hours ticked by and the ceremony drew closer, bridesmaids fluttered around me in a blur of pastel chiffon. They sensed something was wrong, but attributed my silence to nerves. Only Jasmine knew the truth, staying close by my side, occasionally squeezing my hand in silent support. When my father arrived to escort me to the church, he immediately noticed my state despite my carefully applied makeup. "Princess," he said, using his old nickname for me. "What's wrong? Your eyes are so sad. Is this about the wedding? Because if you're having doubts, we can walk right out that door. No questions asked." For a moment I was tempted to tell him everything, to fall into his arms like the little girl who had missed him so desperately after he left. But I held firm to my plan. This needed to play out exactly as I had envisioned. "I need you to trust me, Dad," I said, looking directly into his concerned eyes. "No matter what happens at the church today, I need you to walk me down that aisle and stand by my side. Can you do that for me?" He studied my face for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Always, Eden. Whatever you need." The drive to the church passed in a blur. I sat in the back of the vintage Rolls-Royce we had rented for the occasion, watching the city streets pass by, feeling strangely calm now that my decision had been made. Outside the church, guests were already filing in, dressed in their finery, smiling and chatting, unaware of the drama about to unfold. In the small anteroom of the church, I stood before a full-length mirror, a vision in white lace and delicate beading. The dress was everything I had dreamed of, elegant, timeless, with a sweetheart neckline and a train that whispered across the floor as I moved. My hair was arranged in soft waves, adorned with tiny pearl pins. The veil, my something borrowed from Jasmine's sister, floated around my shoulders like a cloud. I looked every inch the blushing bride. Only my eyes, hard and determined beneath their coating of mascara, told a different story. The wedding coordinator poked her head in. 5 minutes, Eden. Everyone's seated. Your mother is in the front row. She's been asking for you all morning, by the way." I bet she has, I thought grimly. My bridesmaids lined up in the narthex, making final adjustments to each other's dresses and hair. Jasmine, as maid of honor, would enter last before me. She gave me one final fierce hug. "You're the strongest person I know," she whispered. "Go show them what that means." The music began. Pachelbel's canon played by the string quartet we had hired. One by one, my bridesmaids processed into the sanctuary. Then came the traditional changing of the music to "Here Comes the Bride." My father offered his arm, and with one deep breath to steady myself, I took it. The doors swung open. 200 faces turned to watch my entrance, smiles of anticipation on every one. The church was beautiful, filled with the spring flowers I had selected: peonies, ranunculus, and sweet peas in soft whites and blushes. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the polished wooden pews. At the altar stood Thomas, handsome in his black tuxedo, his face a mask of tension. Our eyes met, and I saw naked fear in his. Beside the front pew sat my mother, stunning as always, in a silvery blue gown that highlighted her eyes. She smiled at me with her lips, but not her eyes, which held a question, a warning. One step at a time, I began the long walk down the aisle, my father's arm solid beneath my hand. Each step required conscious effort, my body wanting to flee in the opposite direction. But I kept my chin up, my eyes forward, my expression carefully neutral. As we approached the altar, Thomas stepped forward, extending his hand to receive me from my father. I saw a light sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the cool air of the church. "Eden," he whispered as I took my place beside him. "I'm so sorry. Please, we need to talk." I gave no indication that I had heard him, keeping my eyes on Pastor Davis as he welcomed the congregation and began to speak about the sanctity of marriage, the importance of fidelity and honesty between husband and wife. The irony was so thick, I could hardly breathe through it. The ceremony progressed through the readings we had selected months ago. Love is patient, love is kind. The words now seemed hollow, a fairy tale I had been naive enough to believe in. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat during the passage about love keeping no record of wrongs. Good. Let her squirm. Finally, we reached the moment of truth. Pastor Davis turned to Thomas. "Do you, Thomas James Cooper, take Eden Grace Jenkins to be your lawfully wedded wife to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Thomas's voice shook slightly as he replied, "I do." Pastor Davis turned to me, smiling benevolently. "And do you, Eden Grace Jenkins, take Thomas James Cooper to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" This was it, the moment I had planned for. With steady hands, I reached out toward Pastor Davis. "May I use the microphone, please?" I asked, my voice clear and strong. A murmur of confusion rippled through the church as Pastor Davis, momentarily taken aback, handed me the microphone. Thomas tensed beside me, his face draining of color. In the front row, my mother half rose from her seat, alarm flashing in her eyes. I took a deep breath, scanning the faces of friends and family who had gathered to celebrate what should have been the happiest day of my life. The silence in the church grew heavy with anticipation. "I want to thank you all for coming today." I began, my voice steady, despite the hammering of my heart. "Many of you have traveled far to be here, and I'm grateful for your presence. I had planned to stand here and make vows of love, trust, and fidelity to Thomas, but I've recently discovered that those concepts mean something very different to him than they do to me." Thomas reached for my arm, whispering urgently, "Eden, please don't do this." I stepped away from him, continuing as if he hadn't spoken. Last night, after our rehearsal dinner, I returned to our apartment to retrieve my written vows. Instead, I found something I wasn't expecting. My voice remained calm, almost conversational. I found my fiancé in our bed with another woman. Gasps echoed through the sanctuary. Thomas's mother covered her mouth in shock. His brother Kyle's expression hardened into anger. "That alone would be devastating enough," I continued. "But what makes this betrayal particularly unbearable is the identity of the woman." I turned slightly, looking directly at my mother, who sat rigid with fury and embarrassment. It was my mother, Amanda Jenkins. The church erupted in shocked whispers. My mother stood up, her face contorted with rage and humiliation. "Eden, that's enough," she hissed. "You're making a scene." "Yes, Mom, I am making a scene," I agreed, my voice growing stronger. "For once, I'm not shrinking away or pretending everything is fine. For once, I'm telling the truth about what you've done." I turned back to address the congregation. "Some of you have known my mother and me for years. You've seen her competitive nature, her need to be the center of attention. Throughout my life, she has consistently undermined my relationships, flirted with my boyfriends, and tried to prove that she is more desirable, more worthy of attention than her own daughter." Thomas was shaking his head desperately. "Eden, please. It was a mistake. One terrible mistake." I turned to him, allowing my hurt and anger to show for the first time. "Was it, Thomas? Just one mistake? Or have you been sneaking around with my mother for weeks? The late work nights? The wedding errands that took you to her house? The secretive phone calls?" His silence was all the confirmation I needed. "I've spent the entire night thinking about what to do." I continued, addressing the congregation again. I could have called off the wedding. I could have disappeared and left all of you wondering what happened. I could have gone through with the ceremony and dealt with this privately. I paused, looking around at the rapt faces. But I realized that would be continuing a pattern that has shaped my entire life, keeping secrets, protecting people who don't deserve protection, shrinking myself to accommodate others' betrayals. My mother tried to interrupt again. "You've always been so dramatic, Eden. This is hardly the time or place." "This is exactly the time and place, Mom," I cut her off. "You chose to sleep with my fiancé the night before my wedding. You don't get to dictate how or when I respond to that." I removed my engagement ring, the vintage sapphire that had once belonged to Thomas's grandmother, and placed it carefully on the podium next to Pastor Davis, who stood frozen in shock. I cannot and will not marry a man who has betrayed me in the most painful way possible with the person who should have protected me above all others. My voice finally cracked slightly, but I pushed through. I deserve better than both of you. I deserve honesty, faithfulness, and respect. I turned to face my stunned guests directly. "The wedding is obviously canceled. However, we have a beautiful reception venue ready with food, music, and an open bar. I've paid for it, and I see no reason to waste it. Consider it transformed into a celebration of truth and self-respect, rather than a marriage. Those of you who wish to join me there are welcome. Those who don't, I understand completely." With that, I handed the microphone back to Pastor Davis, lifted the front of my dress slightly, and walked back down the aisle alone. The church remained in shocked silence for several seconds before erupting into chaos behind me. As I reached the narthex, Jasmine materialized at my side, slipping her arm through mine. "That was the most badass thing I've ever seen," she whispered fiercely. "I'm so proud of you." My father caught up with us at the church entrance, his face a mixture of shock, pride, and terrible anger. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I nodded, suddenly exhausted now that the adrenaline was beginning to fade. "Every word." He pulled me into a tight hug. "Then let's get you out of here. My car's around back." As we slipped out through a side door, avoiding the crowd that was now spilling out of the main entrance, I heard Thomas calling my name. I didn't look back. For the first time in our relationship, his voice held no power over me. The drive to the reception venue was surreal. I sat in the back of my father's car, still in my wedding dress, watching the city pass by through tinted windows. No one spoke. What was there to say that could possibly address the magnitude of what had just occurred? At the Four Seasons Ballroom, the staff had just finished the final preparations for what they still believed would be a wedding reception. Crystal glasses sparkled on white-clothed tables. The multi-tiered cake stood as the centerpiece, my initials and Thomas's intertwined in delicate sugarwork that now seemed like a cruel joke. The event coordinator rushed over, her clipboard clutched to her chest. Ms. Jenkins, we weren't expecting you for another hour. The wedding ceremony finished early." "You could say that," I replied. "There's been a change of plans. The wedding is off, but the reception will continue as scheduled." Her professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing stunned confusion before snapping back into place. "Of course. We'll make any necessary adjustments. Would you like us to remove the, she gestured toward the wedding cake. "Leave it," I said. "It can be a reminder that sometimes the prettiest facades hide the ugliest truths." She nodded uncertainly and hurried away to brief the staff on the unusual turn of events. I asked Jasmine to help me out of my wedding dress in the venue's bridal suite. I had packed a change of clothes in my emergency bag, a simple black cocktail dress that now seemed providentially appropriate. As Jasmine carefully unpinned my veil and hung up the gown I had spent months selecting, tears finally began to fall. "It's okay to break down now," Jasmine said softly, wrapping her arms around me. "You've been so strong, inhumanly strong." "I don't feel strong," I whispered, the tears coming faster. "I feel humiliated, betrayed, so angry I can hardly breathe through it. All valid, and yet you just stood in front of 200 people and reclaimed your power in the most magnificent way. That's the definition of strength." I wiped my eyes, careful not to smudge the makeup that had been professionally applied to make me a beautiful bride. Will anyone even come to this thing, do you think? Or am I about to host the world's most expensive pity party? My answer came within the hour. To my surprise, the ballroom began to fill. Not with everyone who had been invited to the wedding, certainly, but with more people than I had dared hope. My bridesmaids arrived in a group having changed out of their formal dresses into more appropriate attire. Colleagues from work, college friends, even Thomas's brother Kyle appeared, giving me a wordless hug that conveyed both apology and solidarity. The cocktail hour was well underway when the doors opened to reveal Thomas still in his wedding tuxedo, his face haggard with emotion. The room fell silent as he made his way toward me, stopping a respectful distance away. "Eden," he said, his voice cracking, "can we please talk privately?" I regarded him steadily, surprised by how little I felt looking at the man I had planned to spend my life with. Not hatred, not even anger anymore. Just a profound emptiness where love had been. "There's nothing left to say, Thomas. You made your choice. It wasn't like that. It was a stupid, drunken mistake. She came over after the rehearsal dinner upset about seeing your dad with his new wife." One thing led to another. "Stop," I interrupted, raising my hand. "I don't need or want the details. The fact is, you slept with my mother. There's no coming back from that. There's no explanation that could possibly make it forgivable." "I love you," he said desperately. "I've always loved you." "No, you haven't. Love doesn't do what you did. Love doesn't betray at the deepest level. What you feel might be desire or comfort or fear of being alone, but it isn't love." Security guards. I hadn't noticed before, moved closer, alerted by Jasmine, who had been watching the exchange with hawk-like attention. Thomas noticed them too and backed away, hands raised in surrender. "This isn't over, Eden. When you've had time to cool down." "It is over," I stated firmly. "Completely and irrevocably over. Please leave now or security will escort you out." He looked like he might argue further, but after a moment's hesitation, he turned and walked away, shoulders slumped in defeat. I had barely recovered from this confrontation when a new commotion at the entrance announced my mother's arrival. Unlike Thomas, she hadn't bothered to change, still wearing her silvery blue mother of the bride gown, though her careful makeup was now streaked with tears of rage rather than joy. "How dare you!" she hissed, marching toward me through the crowd that parted to make way for her fury. "How dare you humiliate me like that in front of everyone we know?" I felt something snap inside me, the last thread of obligation, of filial respect that had somehow survived decades of her narcissism and betrayal. "How dare I repeated incredulously. "You slept with my fiancé the night before my wedding, and you're asking how dare I?" "It was a mistake," she insisted, her voice rising. "We'd both had too much to drink. He came to drop off some last-minute seating charts, and I was upset about seeing your father with that woman. I was vulnerable." The excuses were so pathetic, so transparently self-serving that I almost laughed. "Mom, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to say because I won't be repeating it. We are done. Our relationship is over. I don't want to hear from you, see you, or receive any communication from you ever again." Her face contorted with shock and outrage. "You can't mean that. I'm your mother." "A title you've never earned," I replied coolly. "Mothers protect their children. They put their children's needs above their own. They certainly don't sleep with their children's fiancés." "Eden, please," she began, her voice shifting to the manipulative whine I knew so well. "You're all I have. That's not my problem anymore. You made your choice just like Thomas did. Now you get to live with the consequences." My father, who had been standing nearby watching the exchange with growing anger, stepped forward. "Amanda, I think you should leave. Now." She whirled on him. "This is none of your business, William. You lost the right to have any say in our lives when you walked out 29 years ago." "I walked out on you, not on Eden," he corrected her, "and I've regretted every day that I didn't fight harder for custody. Maybe if I had, she would have grown up with at least one decent parent." Security approached again, this time without prompting. Two suited men flanked my mother. "Ma'am, we need to ask you to leave the premises." For a moment I thought she might resist, might create the kind of dramatic scene she had always excelled at. But something in my expression must have told her this was a battle she couldn't win. With a last venomous glare at me, she allowed herself to be escorted out. As the doors closed behind her, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the burden of a lifetime trying to win the approval of a woman incapable of putting anyone's needs above her own. The sensation was so profound that I swayed slightly, steadied by Jasmine's hand on my elbow. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. I nodded, surprising myself with the truth of my response. "I think I will be." The reception continued, transforming gradually from a scene of shocked whispers into something unexpectedly warm and supportive. Friends formed a protective circle around me. Thomas's parents approached to offer a tearful apology for their son's behavior, assuring me they considered his actions unforgivable and that I would always have their love and respect. His brother Kyle spent much of the evening by my side, his steady presence a silent reminder that I wasn't being judged for my decision to end the wedding in such a public way. As the night wore on, what had begun as perhaps the worst day of my life evolved into something different. Not happy, certainly, but strangely empowering. For the first time, I had refused to be a victim of my mother's manipulations or to quietly accept betrayal for the sake of appearances. I had spoken my truth regardless of the cost. The knowledge that I was capable of such strength would stay with me long after the pain of this day had faded. When the last guests had departed, and only my closest friends remained, we gathered around a table strewn with half-empty champagne glasses and barely touched wedding cake. My father, who had stayed by my side throughout the evening, pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead. "I'm so proud of you, Eden," he said, "and so sorry you had to go through this. If you need anything at all, I'm here." "Just keep being here," I replied, squeezing his hand. "That's all I need right now." After everyone had gone and the venue staff were beginning to clear away the evidence of the reception, I returned to my hotel room alone. With methodical determination, I removed every trace of Thomas from my overnight bag. A t-shirt I had packed to sleep in, a photo tucked into my wallet, the lip balm he preferred when we kissed. I deleted his number from my phone, unfriended him on social media, and emailed his brother to arrange for my belongings to be packed and removed from our shared apartment while Thomas was at work on Monday. It was nearly dawn when I finally lay down, exhausted beyond tears, beyond thought. As I drifted towards sleep, a strange sense of peace settled over me. The future I had planned was gone, shattered beyond repair. But in its place lay something unexpected, the freedom to build a new future entirely on my own terms. 6 months can change everything. Or at least that's what I discovered in the half-year following what should have been my wedding day, but instead became my liberation. The first weeks were the hardest. I moved in temporarily with Jasmine while looking for a new apartment, unable to face returning to the home I had shared with Thomas. Each day brought fresh challenges. Explaining the situation to distant relatives and friends who hadn't been at the wedding, sorting out finances that had become entangled during our engagement, navigating the awkward reactions of colleagues who didn't know how to address what had happened. The story had spread quickly, as such sensational tales always do. I received everything from messages of support to judgmental comments about airing dirty laundry in public. Some people felt I should have handled the betrayal privately. Others praised my courage in speaking my truth. I listened to it all, but let none of it define me. This was my journey, and for perhaps the first time in my life, I was determining exactly how I would walk it. 2 weeks after the non-wedding, I began therapy with Dr. Levine, a compassionate but no-nonsense woman who specialized in family trauma. Our first session set the tone for the work we would do together. "You've experienced a profound double betrayal," she observed after I'd shared my story. "The two people who should have been most protective of your heart violated it in the most intimate way possible. That's going to take significant time and work to process." "I just want to stop feeling so angry," I admitted. "It's exhausting." "Anger is appropriate," she replied. "In fact, it's healthy. It tells you your boundaries have been violated. The goal isn't to eliminate the anger, but to prevent it from consuming you." Over the following months, our weekly sessions became a lifeline. We explored not just the immediate trauma of Thomas and my mother's betrayal, but the long-standing patterns in my relationship with Amanda that had set the stage for it. I came to understand how my mother's narcissism had shaped my own tendencies toward people-pleasing and conflict avoidance. How I had often chosen relationships where I repeated familiar dynamics rather than building healthier ones. Your decision to confront the betrayal publicly was actually a massive break from your established patterns, Dr. Levine pointed out in our third month of therapy. Instead of smoothing things over or blaming yourself, you held the responsible parties accountable. That's significant growth. By the fourth month, I had made a more permanent change. I accepted a job offer in Denver, a city I'd always loved during visits, but had never considered living in because Thomas's architecture firm was based in Chicago. The interior design company I joined specialized in sustainable, eco-friendly spaces, a passion I had put on hold to accommodate Thomas's more traditional aesthetic preferences. The move proved cathartic. Denver's mountains and open skies offered a physical manifestation of the psychological space I was creating in my life. My new apartment, which I decorated entirely to my own taste, became a sanctuary, filled with bold colors and eclectic art pieces that Thomas would have vetoed, but that made my heart sing every time I walked through the door. My relationship with my father, William, underwent a renaissance during this period. Without my mother's interference, we were able to build a connection based on who we were now, rather than the painful history we shared. He visited me in Denver twice, and during his second visit, we had a conversation that brought healing I hadn't known I needed. "I've always regretted leaving you with her," he said as we hiked through the foothills near my new home. "I told myself you were better off with your mother than a young girl needs her mom. But the truth is, I was a coward. I knew what Amanda was like, and I chose my own freedom over protecting you." His honesty was painful but necessary. "Why did you stay away for so long?" I asked the question I'd held inside for decades, finally finding voice. He sighed, his face etched with old regret. "Amanda made it nearly impossible at first, threatening legal action, turning you against me. By the time you were old enough to make your own decisions, I figured you probably hated me. And then there was just so much time and distance. But those are excuses, not reasons. The truth is I failed you, Eden, and I'm more sorry than I can ever express." His apology couldn't erase the past, but it opened the door to a future where we could build something new, a relationship based on honesty and clear boundaries, rather than obligation and guilt. My mother, true to form, had attempted to rewrite the narrative almost immediately. According to mutual acquaintances, she was telling anyone who would listen that Thomas had pursued her relentlessly, that she had been vulnerable after seeing my father with his new wife, that she had made one mistake, and I was punishing her disproportionately. She sent tearful voicemails, manipulative emails, even had flowers delivered to my workplace before I left Chicago. I maintained my boundary with unwavering commitment. Each message went unanswered. Each gift was returned. When she showed up unannounced at Jasmine's apartment where I was staying, I closed the door in her face without a word. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but also the most necessary. Levine had helped me understand that my mother's behavior wouldn't change because she didn't believe she needed to change. The only variable I could control was my response to her. Thomas's attempts at reconciliation followed a similar pattern: initial desperation giving way to anger when his pleas went unanswered, then strategic attempts to win me back through mutual friends. Unlike my mother, he eventually accepted the reality that there was no path back to a relationship. His brother Kyle, with whom I had maintained a cordial friendship, told me Thomas had started dating someone new after about 4 months, a woman from his office who had apparently been interested in him for years. "I hope he's faithful to her," was all I said when Kyle shared this information. Kyle had proven to be an unexpected source of support through everything. As Thomas's younger brother, it would have been easy for him to side automatically with his sibling. Instead, he had made it clear from the day of the non-wedding that he found his brother's actions inexcusable. "Family is important," he told me over coffee during a visit to Denver for work. "But so is basic human decency. What Thomas did crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." Our friendship remained strictly platonic. Neither of us had any interest in complicating an already complex situation with romantic entanglements. But his willingness to maintain a connection despite the awkwardness with his brother spoke volumes about his character. 5 months after the move to Denver, I received an invitation to Jasmine's cousin's wedding back in Chicago. My first instinct was to decline. The thought of entering a church again, of watching another bride walk down the aisle toward a trusting future, stirred up emotions I wasn't sure I was ready to handle. But Dr. Levine encouraged me to consider it. Avoidance reinforces fear, she pointed out. At some point, you'll need to reclaim these experiences on your own terms. So I found myself back in Chicago on a crisp autumn Saturday, seated in a pew at St. Mark's Lutheran Church. Not the same church where my own wedding had imploded, but similar enough to trigger a flutter of anxiety in my chest. Jasmine, understanding without being told, kept a steady hand on my arm throughout the ceremony. To my surprise, I found the wedding not painful, but cathartic. Watching the joy on the couple's faces as they exchanged vows, I realized I no longer envied them or mourned my own lost future. Instead, I felt a quiet appreciation for their happiness and an equally quiet gratitude that I had escaped a marriage built on such a fragile foundation. The reception was held at the Palmer House, its gilded opulence a stark contrast to the simple elegance of the ceremony. I was sipping champagne and chatting with Jasmine's brother when I felt a presence at my elbow. I turned to find Thomas standing there, as handsome as ever, in a tailored suit, his expression a careful mask of neutrality. "Eden," he said simply, "you look well." "Thomas," I acknowledged, surprised by the steadiness of my voice and the absence of pain at seeing him. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Jasmine's cousin David and I were college roommates," he explained. "I wasn't sure if you'd be attending." An awkward silence fell between us. 6 months ago, this man had been the center of my world, the person I had planned to grow old with. Now he was practically a stranger, familiar, yet unknown. "I hear you're living in Denver now," he ventured. "Yes, new job, new start." He nodded, fiddling with his champagne glass. "I'm glad. You deserve good things." The inadequacy of his words might once have infuriated me. Now I just found it sad. "Yes, I do," I agreed simply. He seemed to be waiting for something more. Perhaps absolution, perhaps an opening to deeper conversation. I offered neither. Finally, he asked the question that had probably brought him to my side in the first place. "Have you spoken to your mother at all?" So that was it. Not concern for me, but curiosity about Amanda. Some things never changed. "No," I replied coolly. "And I don't intend to." He looked genuinely surprised. "Not ever, but she's your mother." Biology doesn't entitle someone to a relationship, Thomas, especially when they've proven repeatedly that they can't be trusted with one. He shifted uncomfortably. "She misses you. She talks about you all the time." The implication that he was still in contact with my mother hit like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. "You're still seeing her." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Not like that, just we run into each other sometimes. Chicago isn't that big." "Well, I hope you both find whatever it is you're looking for," I said, setting down my empty glass. "If you'll excuse me, I promised Jasmine I'd help her touch up her makeup before the toasts." It wasn't true, but it provided the exit I needed. As I walked away, I realized something remarkable. I felt nothing for him anymore. Not love, not hate, not even anger. Just a vague pity, mixed with something like relief. The spell was broken completely and irrevocably. Later that evening, as the reception was winding down, I stepped onto the terrace for a breath of fresh air. The Chicago skyline glittered against the night sky, familiar, and yet somehow different, just as I was different from the woman who had lived here 6 months ago. I heard the terrace door open behind me and turned to find my mother standing there. She looked older somehow, the careful makeup not quite concealing the new lines around her eyes and mouth. She wore a red dress that was a size too small, her trademark blonde hair freshly highlighted. "Eden," she said, her voice soft with practiced vulnerability. "Please don't walk away. Just give me 2 minutes." I considered leaving anyway, but decided against it. Running would suggest she still had power over me. Instead, I turned to face her, fully silent but attentive. She took this as encouragement. I know I hurt you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I'm still your mother. You can't just cut me out of your life forever. Actually, I can, I replied calmly. And I have. Everyone makes mistakes, Eden, even terrible ones. But family is family. Blood is blood. I studied her face, searching for any sign of genuine remorse rather than self-pity. I found none. What do you want from me, Mom? Forgiveness, reconciliation. For things to go back to how they were. I want my daughter back, she said, a tear sliding dramatically down her cheek. I miss you. For a moment I felt the old pull, the lifetime habit of catering to her emotions, managing her feelings, making myself smaller to accommodate her needs. But only for a moment. I believe you miss me, I said carefully. But I don't think you've ever really seen me. Not as a person separate from you with my own needs and feelings. You've seen me as an extension of yourself, a competitor, sometimes an audience, but never truly as your child to be protected and nurtured. She flinched as if I'd struck her. That's not fair. I raised you alone. I sacrificed everything. This isn't a negotiation, I interrupted gently. I'm not listing grievances to be addressed. I'm explaining why I've made the choice I've made. I don't hate you, Mom. I don't even blame you anymore for being who you are. But I've learned that I deserve relationships that nurture me rather than drain me. People who respect my boundaries instead of treating them as challenges to be overcome. People who would never dream of betraying me the way you did. So that's it. 32 years as mother and daughter, and you just throw it away. I shook my head. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing what to carry forward. And right now, that doesn't include a relationship with you. She stared at me, her expression shifting from hurt to anger. You think you're so much better than me now, don't you, perfect Eden, with her clean conscience and her moral high ground? No, Mom. I don't think I'm better than you. I just know what I need to be healthy and whole. And right now, that means distance from you. I moved toward the door, pausing as I passed her. I wish you well, truly. I hope someday you find whatever it is you've been looking for all these years. But I can't be the one to give it to you. I left her there on the terrace, staring out at the city lights. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting or tears, just the quiet closing of a door that had been coming unhinged for decades. Back in Denver, life continued its forward momentum. I made friends at work and in my apartment building. I joined a hiking group that explored a different trail each weekend. I dated casually, nothing serious yet, but enjoyable connections that helped me remember I was still capable of attraction and intimacy without the shadow of past betrayals darkening every interaction. The interior design firm promoted me to lead designer on a major project, reimagining the public spaces of a historic hotel being renovated into luxury apartments. It was challenging creative work that pushed my skills to their limits and reminded me daily that I was more than what had happened to me. I was a professional with talents and ambitions all my own, not defined by my relationships or their failures. 1 year after the wedding, that wasn't. I hosted a small dinner party in my apartment. Jasmine, who had flown in for the weekend, 2 close friends from work, and Kyle, who happened to be in Denver for a conference. As we sat around my dining table, sharing wine and laughter, I was struck by how full my life had become in the aftermath of what had seemed like total devastation. A toast, Jasmine proposed, raising her glass. To Eden, who taught us all what true strength looks like. To second chances, added Kyle, and to building something better from the ashes of what's burned. I raised my own glass, looking around at these people who had chosen to stand by me through the darkest period of my life. To truth, I said. Painful as it sometimes is, it's the only foundation worth building on. Later, after my guests had departed and I was preparing for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was changed from the bride-to-be of a year ago. More thoughtful, perhaps, certainly more cautious, but also more authentically herself. I had survived the unimaginable and emerged not unscathed, but undiminished. The pain of betrayal hadn't disappeared completely. I doubted it ever would. But it had transformed from an acute, debilitating agony to a dull ache that surfaced occasionally and then receded like an old injury that flares up in damp weather. It was a part of my story now, but no longer the defining chapter. In the quiet of my bedroom, I opened my journal and wrote the words that had become something of a personal mantra: "Your worth is not determined by those who fail to recognize it." The journey from devastation to healing hadn't been a straight line. It had twisted and doubled back on itself, some days marking progress, and others seeming like regression. But standing now as this one-year milestone, I could see how far I'd come. From a woman silenced by shock and betrayal, to one who had found her voice and used it to reclaim her power. I realized I was finally free, not just from Thomas and my mother, but from the need for their approval or love. Free from the patterns that had kept me small and accommodating. Free to build a life that reflected my true self rather than someone else's expectations. The wedding that never happened had in its way given me a gift far more precious than any I might have received from the registry. It had given me back to myself, and that I now understood was worth every moment of pain it had taken to get here. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that forced you to completely rebuild your life? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments below. If this video resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and self-discovery. Remember, sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to stand in your truth, whatever that may be.